So you fire out all the apps, you start getting your interview requests, you go through and you schedule your interviews. And here's where is key. So on your first interview, usually it's some sort of a 15-minute type phone screen just to get a pulse check to see if you are who you really say you are, and you have just basic skills in the areas you say you're proficient. A lot of times these are with HR reps, recruiters, or even staffing type agencies. So they might not necessarily know the ins and outs of your specific job requisition you're applying for, but make sure that you at least know what you're talking about when you get on these phone screens. The other important part of the first phone screen is to set the expectation that, hey, yes, by the way, I do live in the state for which I applied for the job. Here's a pro tip. For me, I'm from Washington State, so I put Seattle on my LinkedIn and my job applications to where recruiters in Seattle can reach out to me. I get paid through Washington State. There are some income tax benefits to where Washington State is one of the few states that doesn't have income tax, which I know might sound surprising to a lot of people. And that assuages that concern. So, hey, do you actually live in Washington State? Or they'll ask me, can you actually come into the office in Seattle? The answer is no, and here's the way I follow this up. No, it turns out I actually live in the east side of Washington State. I'm actually transparent with recruiters and tell them a recruiter told me to put Seattle on my resume so people like you can find me, and here we are in this conversation. I should also note that I have a place in Mexico to where I spend some time during the year. However, I have everything set up accounting and tax-wise to be paid through Washington. I've never had issues with previous employers. And I'll list something off the lines of so-and-so never had a problem with this, and I've never had a problem with this either. However, I do want to bring this up because there have been instances to where employees have a strict must be physically located in the state where you're hired policy. However, if that's not you, then let's continue the conversation. And I've found actually presenting it this way has led me to like 90% of people saying, oh yeah, no, that's not an issue. We just want to make sure that you have a US bank account in the state we are hiring you. And that's from HR policies, legal policies, accounting type things, and so on. So it's really of no concern to you, but you want to get that out from the get-go. What you don't want to have happen is have 3 to 5 interviews, you get through and actually talk to the CEO so you can get his final sign off. And I've actually had this happen where they say, oh, well, where are you now? Oh, I'm actually in Mexico City. Oh, it says here you're in Washington State. Yeah, and in this instance, I actually did bring it up in the initial phone screen. They must have just forgotten to mention this in their notes as they were forwarding it on to multiple hiring managers. It was a lot of effort. There's usually some sort of small project and a presentation or some sort of panel interview. Again, it depends on your seniority level in your career, but in this case, it was interview number 5, and oh yeah, no, we can't have you actually living in Mexico. I had another job where they actually shipped a laptop down to Mexico, and then on day 1 to meet with the hiring manager for the onboarding process, there was the head of HR sitting there too, and pretty much I was hired and fired the same day. Oh, we didn't realize you lived in Mexico. And in this job, they actually made me sign a consent form to have all my interviews recorded, and I told them go back, check the recorded interviews. I did bring that up in the initial phone screen. However, in my entire job search career living abroad, I've only had that happen twice. The rest of the time, if you precede the conversation, just like dating, you precede the polls, well, you set the expectations in this phase of the conversation. Throughout your interview process, make sure, just like dating, that you're timely. As soon as they send you an interview request, be Johnny on the spot, get that interview scheduled, and move things along the process. The longer it takes, the more likely you are to lose momentum and the less likely you are to actually land the job. Just like dating, you want to be super efficient here. Your time is valuable, and obviously one of the benefits of moving abroad is that you're freeing up more time for yourself. So make sure that you are efficient in this process. Now you'll go through your interview phase. Usually I recommend having some sort of a spreadsheet to track who you've talked to, where you're at in the process, any sort of salary, initial negotiations you've had, any additional benefits, perks, and so on. If you're doing volume just like you are with your dating, it's very easy to get lost in the details. So you want to make sure you're tracking everything. You go through your process, make sure that you watch all of your YouTube interview tip videos, that you really get a working base of knowledge. I actually have a doc in Google Drive to where any questions that they've asked me in interviews that I'm not prepared to answer, I list those down. I'll come up with what my kind of response would be based on my actual experience. And again, plug that through ChatGPT, run it back out, have it optimized for job interviews, and then practice, practice, practice. Just like dating, you'll find that most of the objections fall into broader categories. Most of the questions in your job search fall into broader categories. Yes, they might ask you a question on the surface level that might throw you for a loop, but essentially when you dig deeper, they're looking for very specific things, and a lot of times these very specific things they're looking for are the same things everyone is looking for. So keep that in mind. You want to be efficient with this process. You want to be prepared. And then just like the dating thing, once you start getting it down, you'll start knocking out these phone screens. You'll start getting interviews, and eventually you'll make it through the process to start getting offers. Now, before you start evaluating your offers, there are questions you want to ask in the process that are remote friendly. Usually I ask things like, what does the line of communication look like? Are we required to work for a certain set of hours during a specific time zone, usually pegged in the United States if you're from the US, such as I am? Or is it more so just make all your recurring meetings and make sure you get your work done and we'll be fine? And I've found that like 80-90% of employers usually agree with me on the latter. I pose the question this way for very specific reasons. It's where they usually agree with the second option, say, okay, just get everything done and you'll have no issue with us. Or some even maybe go a step further and say, oh, we don't like to micromanage here. We are a remote first workforce and we want to just make sure that you work well in the remote first environment. So usually this is what they're looking for. Kudos if it's an actual 100% remote first company, or if you go through recruiters, a lot of times they can help you too, to where they'll only deliver you roles that are 100% open to working remote. You do just have to make sure to say, hey, by the way, yes, I am physically located in the US. Yes, I have permanent residency there. Yes, everything is legal for accounting and tax purposes. However, I also have a place abroad where I do spend some time. Is this going to be an issue? Obviously, if I need to come into the office, go to meetings, conferences, client events, whatever, then I can certainly do that. Although I do recommend finding jobs that don't have a lot of in-person meetings, that don't have a lot of conferences or trade shows or client events, because again, you want to free up your time, unless that is something you are specifically looking for. The line of communication question is always great. What time zones are we working on? What are the expectations looking like? Preferred methods of communication. So I usually ask a hiring manager, what is your preferred method of communication? For me, it's usually Slack first, email, meetings. I usually have a rule that says something along the lines of, don't set a meeting if you can email it, and don't send an email if you can Slack it. And that just keeps communication just nice and tight and efficient. A lot of employers also want to make sure you have experience working in an asynchronous work culture. That means to where there's people all over the world in all different time zones, and you might not necessarily be on the same time zone with someone in India or Pakistan or London or Tokyo or what have you, based on the size of the company you will ultimately be working for. Even if you don't have a lot of remote work experience, at some point in your career, you've likely worked with people in other time zones. So I would just mention this, that, okay, yes, maybe I'm physically in the office right now in my current role. However, I have worked asynchronistically throughout my career in these positions for these reasons. Here's what I learned. Here's what it looked like, yada, yada, yada. They really just want to make sure that you are acculturated to work in an asynchronistic environment.